So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Rising Shield of Hero. So let's start the series. As he ran toward the midget, he could feel the blades rubbing against his ribs. He didn't care, though. He was aware that he would not live since he could feel his blood seeping everywhere. He didn't care, though. His sole weapon was a kunai in his mouth since he was unable to hold his sword any longer. He did not care because that was all he needed. Right now, a haughty little piece of trash was the only thing that mattered to him. In addition to plotting their betrayal, that bastard had desecrated Haku's body. He had viewed the youngster as a son, but he had never told him so. When he had died rescuing him, it had ripped him apart, believing he was merely a tool. To be honest, at that moment, he hoped Kakashi would immediately murder him. Then there had been that useless waste of space. And suddenly he could see that waste of space right before him. The midget was emitting a terror that he could smell. He sunk the kunai in his mouth as far down into his chest as he could. If you want to go to the same place as your friend, then go alone. I've no intention of going to the same place as Haku. He couldn't hear the midget, but he could see his mouth move. He could only hear the blood pulsing through his ears, which was getting progressively slower as his death drew nearer. It was impossible for him not to laugh. I'm taking you with me, to hell. He took a stumbling step back and drew out the kunai. Even though it was all he could do to stay upright, he had to do something. And if he passed out before completing it, he would be doomed. Even the unremarkable Kirigakure no Kijin can die and become a real demon in hell. He squatted down, getting ready for his final kill. This will be fun. We'll have plenty of time to see if I'm a baby devil down in hell. He used his remaining strength to maneuver his body in such a way that he severed the little shit's head and sent it flying into the thugs group. He gave them a final death gaze before losing all power and collapsing forward. His final objective had been achieved. He might now pass away. The thugs he saw suddenly scurried and fled. Most likely, Kakashi had done something. He was grateful that the man had not only let him proceed as he saw fit but also, it seemed, prevented the small army from harming him or Haku anymore. Out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw feet, but his eyesight was gradually becoming black, so he couldn't be certain. Kakashi. I have a favor to ask. I want to see his face. Even though his body was constantly cooling, he somehow identified the cold surrounding him as snow. Then he noticed it. The face of Haku before him. In a miracle, he found the strength to put his hand on his son's face. If I could, I'd like to go to the same place as you. Even as his eyesight became entirely dark, he was still fighting. In an attempt to ask Kakashi to give him his sword, he hoisted his other arm on his chest but was unable to do so. He assumed the man had understood and complied as another fist closed around something. He had lost all sense of emotion. This devil was going to tear hell apart in order to see his son one more, so it had better get ready. Around him, he could hear voices. It was obvious what was happening, human voices. It was impossible that he, the Kirigakure no Kijin, had entered paradise. Oh great heroes, please save our world. He opened his eyes. In front of him was a group of folks wearing strange garments. He looked around a little. There are 7 robed individuals in front of him, including 3 children, 2 of whom are armed, and 1 who is shielded. Someone hiding in the shadows in the corner was the only possible danger because he couldn't see him and couldn't tell how strong he was. Behind the robes, there were 4 exits and 2 large doors that likely led to wherever he was at the moment. A hidden door beside the person in hiding. If he had to flee, both were out of the question. The other two were windows. They would have been good escape routes if he hadn't been worn out and nearly dead from fighting Kakashi and the goons. All of this had been on his mind in a split second before his thoughts ceased. He felt neither hurt nor tired. He felt all right, in fact. He felt a familiar and comforting weight on his back that pressed the harness straps into his shoulders now that he was focusing on himself. He could leave at any time because he was at full strength and had Kobakira Bocho. He felt the resistance as he tensed some muscles to inspect the remainder of his equipment without moving. Check the 7-pronged kunai up each sleeve. Check out the 2 ordinary kunai and Forsenban on the inside of his harness. Check the supply scroll in his left pocket. Check the water scroll in his right pocket. Check for explosive tags in his back pocket. Hold on, he looked into his left pocket once again. Something that shouldn't have been there was dangling from his belt. Silently, he glanced down and saw a sword. After the man had implored them to preserve their world, he took it and held it in front of his face while he listened absently to the talk that had begun. He was fairly certain, after looking at the sword, that he was no longer in any of the nations on his continent. He had never seen a sword like this toothpick. It was definitely not intended for clean cuts and was too thick to be used quickly. However, it was neither large nor heavy enough to be intended for a more vicious style, at least not one he was aware of, that depended more on strength than quickness. His kunai were sharper than this, so when he ran his thumb over the edge, he was completely dissatisfied. He swiftly played back the chat he had been listening to with half an ear as he saw the others heading for the exit. The 3 lads were obviously pampered little shits who had no idea how the world operated, but they might not be completely worthless because 2 of them had openly requested payment. It was time for them to meet the king. He made a snap choice, tossed the blade away, and trailed after them as the parade came to a close. There was not a large enough water source nearby to covertly replace himself with a Mizu Bunshin, even though he would have loved to. He passed a window and looked out. His prior belief that he was no longer in his reality was validated by what he observed. He had never seen such building before, and it was too different. As he turned to face the blue sky, he caught a glimpse of something in the corner of his eye. Against the blue sky, he could easily make out a strange symbol in the lower right corner of his vision. His initial thinking was a genjutsu, and he unconsciously interrupted the flow of his chakras without any effect. He hadn't experienced a genjutsu that wouldn't go away, and the symbol was still present. Therefore, either the caster was too strong for him to get out or this was not under a genjutsu. He fixed his attention on the object, but a clear sign blocked his view. His fist went straight for Kobakira Bocho as he lowered himself in preparation for a blow. He read the sign after a moment had passed with no action. I Situation Kirigakure no Kijin by Zabuza Momochi. Sword Hero LV1, 0%, Class Equipment, the Sword of Legend, Error Unidentified Weapon, Weapons from Other Worlds, Scrolls from Other Worlds, Clothing from Other Worlds. What this was meant to be baffled him completely. He was aware of his name and moniker and knew that they were meant to inform him of what he now possessed, but that was the extent of it. What was an LV? And he was definitely not a hero. Was Kobakira Bocho supposed to be that strange mistake thing? When he had tossed away that toothpick, which was supposedly a legendary sword, back in that other room, why was it stating that he still possessed it? When he looked down at his side, the sword he had thrown away was there once again. He hardly realized the king had begun to speak when they reached the throne room. Why was the sword at his side still there after he had clearly flung it away? I note, until the hero's duty is completed, the legendary weapon cannot be unequipped. The weapon will be returned to the hero when it is lost. Alright, so he might have an endless supply of kunai if he could reforge it. If possible, he ought to see a blacksmith, but for the time being, he ought to focus entirely on his surroundings. It seems that he had made the decision just in time. Now then, heroes. Tell me your names. Did he just get orders from that wrinkled old fart? Although he would have loved to tell him to get lost, he needed more details first. Even though he committed mass murder and was a cold-blooded killer, he wasn't a moron. Despite not being regarded as a genius, he was clever and crafty. For a moment he observed the king carefully. On the exterior, he appeared to be an elderly and fragile guy. On the other hand, his posture was that of a seasoned soldier, and his eyes were closely examining him. He was also ready at a moment's notice. Zabuza Momochi. For a few more seconds, the king's eyes remained fixed on him before shifting to the blonde brandishing a spear. I'll go next, then. The name's Kitamura Motoyasu, college student, 21. What was college in Camus's name? Was that meant to be an advanced academy of some kind? However, the child was not a shinobi, much less a fighter. Perhaps that was a civilian issue he was unaware of, especially not wearing those absurd attire. Oh, me now? My name is Kawasumi Itsuki. I'm a 17-year-old high school student. All right, that was much more perplexing. Did the height of a school or academy's building matter? Once more, the child was not a warrior, but perhaps it would be better if it were high on a mountain so that one could adjust to the low oxygen levels. Oh, sorry. Guess I'm last. The name's Iwatani Naofumi, and I'm a 20-year-old college student. So, whatever that was in the end, another college student. When he turned to face the king again, he saw the contemptuous and hateful expression the guy had given the child. That was fascinating. Most likely, he didn't think him disrespectful. If he had, he would have frowned at the other two as well and told his guards to arrest him for merely stating his name. Was it because that was the only shield the child had? If that's the case, the man was a fool. If you hit it hard enough and in the correct place, anything may be a weapon. Someone wouldn't be able to stand up again with just one well-placed blow to the throat with the tip of the shield. Momochi, Motoyasu and Itsuki, very well. Your Majesty? What about me? Oh, yes. My sincerest apologies, Naofumi. That wrinkled old fart was undoubtedly biased against the child. The man was muttering something about an accursed devil, and he could hear it. He was very certain that no one else heard him, but he didn't talk loud enough that he would have been heard without sending chakra into his ears. Now, if everybody could please confirm their statuses? Was that the intended purpose of that thing? The strange semi-transparent sign in the lower right corner caught his attention once more. Upon closer inspection, he noticed 3 additional items at the top of the sign, which appeared to be marked in a binder. The king was most likely referring to the first one, which said status. Skills and magic were read by the other 2. He was very skilled in ninjutsu, taijutsu, and kenjutsu, so that's presumably what was written there. However, the third area piqued his interest. There was no magic. Yes, a fool would call chakra and jutsus magic, but they both had rigorous guidelines and weren't something you waved around and had happen all of a sudden. After deciding to investigate that area, he lifted his hand and attempted to draw it to the front, but it passed through without any opposition. His brows were wrinkled. Perhaps it was as simple as opening this item, determining it was worth a try, focusing on the tiny sign, and switching to a new sign in front of him. Magic, water magic and other worlds magic for other world support. His brows furrowed further when he blinked in bewilderment. Did it call for his chakra magic? If it were referring to his Suetun chakra and general chakra enhancement and control as two distinct things, then it might make some sense. Hey, man. Have you figured out how to do it? He noticed the children to his right staring at him with anticipation. Does he need to inform them now? He sensed that the king and everyone else, including a few people he didn't yet know were highly powerful, were watching him. He would comply for the time being. There's some shit on the lower right corner of your vision. Wow, you're right, thanks, man. They complained that he was too weak to assist, but he disregarded them once more. They ought to get off their asses and train if that were the case. He made the decision to open the skill item, only to find it totally vacant. Perhaps it was intended to showcase unique fighting styles rather than universal talents. He pretended to listen quietly, but in reality, he was just listening with half an ear. You couldn't have survived as an S-rank missing nin if you weren't always attentive and had impeccable memory of the previous hour at the very least. Information collecting should be his next course of action. The monarch would undoubtedly have a library, therefore he would search for one tonight. He might then take a brief excursion into the metropolis that he had spotted outside the window. In the hopes that this rule would also apply in this realm, he would visit the two locations where you could obtain information regardless of where you were while wearing a henge. Brothels and bars. If you were prepared to take the extra effort of verifying the information, you could always obtain it there. However, this was frequently accomplished by just comparing the two sources. Additionally, he would be able to evaluate part of the information even if neither was provided. Although he didn't know the standard in this world when it came to strength, common sense, and other things, his techniques were pretty limited. However, he was very certain that he could still rely on some aspects of human nature. Ironically, the most significant one is that people will always tell lies. Unless stating something else was punishable, there would always be one person who would say something different. The amount of untrue information and simple rumors might already be significantly decreased by that fact alone. Therefore, if there was a royal library, he would go to it first, or the king's personal library. After that, he would go to a few bars, where he would learn some gossip and information while earning some cash from wagers and gambling. Finally, if there were brothels in the area, he would go there and pay for some information. He nearly missed their escape since he was so focused on the outdoors. To hide his lack of attention, he gave the king another calculating glance as though he was assessing the information he had been given before he followed the children to their destination. He had already played back the entire exchange by the time they reached the designated quarters. The waves were affecting the entire planet, according to the king and the magicians who had summoned them, so he would assist for the time being as there wasn't much of an option. He was suspicious of a couple things, though. If the king had known that they couldn't level up when near each other, or whatever it meant, why had all four of them been called here at the same location? He would most likely need to ask the children. He was certain that there were other kingdoms, but he wasn't sure if they approved of them simply calling forth all four heroes. He could practically smell the war that would result from this, and conflict meant money to him. However, why would he require money now? In order to raise funds for a fresh revolt against the Mizukage and halt the bloodline purges, he was so desperate that he took on any job he could. He was now in another universe, free of bloodline purges, Kirigakure, Sato, and insane Mizukage. He would need to set a new objective for himself. But one thing was certain. He would choose who he traveled with if he did, and he would not take any of the friends the monarch offered them. He found all these people extremely simple and unimaginative. From what he had observed so far, he was direct in most ways as well, but he was aware of the advantages of different approaches, something that everyone else seemed to lack. Since they've always done it that way, they called in heroes when they couldn't handle the waves on their own. When they reached their lodgings, they went inside the Blondie's room. "Man, this is just like a game, don't you think?" Play? Indeed, he had never actually played any games as a child. However, he couldn't see this looking anything like a board game or a game that kids would play in their spare time. He simply kept being confused by these people. High school, college, and now likening things to a game. What are you talking about? This isn't just like a game, it is a game. I'm pretty sure I've played it before. Alright, Blondie was a crazy person. It's likely that he ought to have discovered that sooner. Unless they had a lot of loose screws, no non-skilled shinobi would remain as composed as he and the bowboy in this kind of circumstance. Yeah, it's really popular. You haven't played it? No. I'm a pretty big otaku myself, and I've never played anything like this. Otaku? He must have heard that somewhere before. Hadn't Haku once used that to make fun of a guy in Taki who mistakenly believed he was a girl? The man had been so fat that it was repulsive. Seriously? But this is Emerald Online. I've never even heard of that. Huh? Are you really a gamer? It's super famous. Sorry, the only really big online games I know about are Odin Online and Fantasy Moon Online. And once more, they had lost him. Why would you play a game on a line that was meant to look like this? He considered simply leaving these individuals if they weren't a possible information source. Additionally, if it weren't for the man who was hidden beneath the window. Really, these were not very good at hiding if they were the shinobi of this world. Although he was out of their line of sight, he could still hear him scribbling notes with a goddamn quill, and his breathing wasn't too low. If you weren't chiseling it in stone, this is perhaps the noisiest way to take notes. What the heck are those? This is the first I've heard of them. What are you all talking about? This world isn't an online game at all, it's from a console game. Hold on, console. Was he referring to devices like TVs and PCs? Large corporations used those relatively new technologies for security or data archiving. Because seals somehow interfered with the machines, making them far more vulnerable than scrolls, shinobi were still reluctant to employ them because the data might be readily erased with a well-placed jutsu of almost any kind. What do you mean console game? The whole selling point was its PvP and trading system. Of course, it was online. PvP and trading? The selling point for it was its continually generated storytelling, although it turned out to be pretty shitty. Guys, what game are you thinking this is, exactly? Like, its name? Bravestar Online. Dimension Wave. So you two are thinking of two different games that somehow were the same, but not. Wait, we can sort this out. Momochi, does this world resemble any game you know? Great, the blondie had to speak to him personally, but he wanted to stay out of it for the time being. You've been talking about computers and shit this whole time, right? The three of them were staring at him as if he were the crazy person in the room. He could occasionally be a little insane, but nevertheless. Of course. What did you think we were talking about? Well, I never used one of those damn things in my life. They've only been around for a few years. Wait, what year are you from? What kind of dumb question is that? How would you get all nations to agree to the same starting date for the year? They'd all want their own historical event to be year zero. Yes, using a single, standardized number to mark the year would be useful, but the communities would never accept that. Bao Boy's brows were furrowed. So you're saying you never used a computer, they were only invented a few years ago, and everyone keeps track of the year in their own way. So I'm assuming you also aren't a cosplayer who died on his way to a convention? The shield kid slammed his palms on the table and abruptly got to his feet. Just hold on a second. What do you mean died? Well, I assumed it's what happened to all of us. I got hit by a truck, and the next thing I remember I was in that room. Wait, you got hit by a truck? That's so cliché, Ice Guy. Oh yeah, what about you? After a brief period of paleness, the blondie scratched shyly at the back of his skull. Well, long story short, I got stabbed by two girls because I couldn't decide between them, so they thought they'd kill me and be with me in the afterlife. Such strange women did exist. In order to stay with the guy she loved forever, a noblewoman once hired him to kidnap him from his family and then murder them both. It had brought him a substantial amount of money. To be honest, he was more shocked by how nonchalantly the two of them discussed this. But these three were cold-blooded killers. It's likely that they had never handled a weapon before, much less taken a life. They were all three looking attentively at him. How much should he divulge now? Got stabbed in the back by a group of thugs while killing a traitorous midget that hired said thugs. Wait, you killed someone? Why was Blondie giving him that look? He had a large sword on his back, didn't he see it? Seriously, Motoyasu? You're surprised by that despite the big-ass sword on his back. I'm more interested in how he can use that thing, it must be heavy as hell. The boy was reaching for his Kubikira Bocho, and he saw it. Touch my sword and I'll shove it down your throat. The child retreated a short distance before quickly turning to face the shield kid. What about you? How'd you die? Was that boy truly so dim-witted? The child has already essentially stated that he didn't die. Do I really have to tell it? Hey, Motoyasa got stabbed by two yanderas, and I'm the most cliché ice guy ever. It can't be that bad. Well, I was in the library reading a book. When I finished reading, I was kinda here. Nothing special. Why did the two men look at the child? He didn't die, so what? It's not a huge problem, and if they were envious, they were foolish, as envy never leads to success. So you two know how this shit works, and you have some idea of it. I got some questions. What are HP, MP, and SP? What is a LV? And since I can't just throw it away, what's this toothpick good for? The sword instantly reappeared on him when he removed it from his belt and hurled it out the open window at the final question. Wait, how'd you figure that out? Tried to throw it away in that room we appeared in. My questions? Blondie was tossing his spear out the window, amazed at its reappearance in his hand, when Bao Boy sneered at him as if he had just inquired about how to use a pen. He glanced at the child, expecting answers. Well, in general in games it is that HP or health points represent how healthy you are. When you have full HP you're in top shape, when you have only one you're basically dying, and with 0 you're dead. An illustration of one's health, then. Apart from determining whether you are poisoned, it is essentially worthless. He was aware of whether he needed to relax or if he was fit to battle. MP are mana points. Mana is the stuff you use to cast spells and magic, but I don't really know how to use it. Thus, pseudochakra. He should search for a location that would be helpful for that tonight as well. It might be helpful in the future, but he would have to check. SP are, I think, skill points. This is different in almost all games. But I guess you could call it weapon magic, like swinging your sword, but the slash kinda flies for a certain distance. Alright, that might be helpful. He had heard of some futon jutsu that could perform that kind of thing. Perhaps there would be more beneficial items. LV is short for level. That is to gauge your strength. Basically, the higher the level, the stronger the person or monster. I guess you could see it as your progress until you can't get any stronger physically when you reached your limit at the maximum level. And what is the maximum level? I don't really know. It varies for each game, some don't even have one. I guess in that case you could say that you could always get stronger, only that it gets almost impossible at one point. Well, at least one of you was helpful. I'll leave you with those two idiots. After saying so, he walked out and into his own room, 2 doors down the corridor. It had the same appearance as the other one. His lack of a secret passageway and the absence of a guy listening in under the window were the only significant differences. With haste, he removed his supply scroll and opened a duplicate of Kubikira Bocho and a dummy of himself. He leaned the blade against the wall and placed the dummy between the sheets before he became silent. He reduced his pulse rate and breathing until even the most proficient Umbu could hardly hear him. He pushed on his window without making a sound, then clung to the wall and shut the window once more. He might not have as much time as he would have liked, based on the moon. The quest for a library within the castle would take too long. He looked to his right, and saw that it headed straight into the town. Someone was crouching on 2 pitons that were jammed into the wall beneath the second window. A cursory glance verified that there were pitons beneath each of their windows. Regardless of whose room they went to, they had been preparing to spy on them. He was just putting his parchment and quill away. They had on a cloak that covered their entire body with a blank face mask. Despite having a similar appearance to Umbu, they were undoubtedly less talented. Even he would never have been able to recognize an Umbu that quickly. Only the greatest of the best were among them. Although they did have a similar appearance, he would refer to them as Umbu for the time being due to a lack of a better term. In the improbable case that the Umbu saw him and he had to get rid of him, he dropped a kunai from his sleeve into his hand. The Umbu departed after a short while when a sign abruptly filled his eyes. I completed weapon copy, kunai with an otherworld pronged. Would you like the legendary sword to change? Yes, / no, I what? Yes, he thought as he removed the toothpick from his waist. The sword abruptly changed into a replica of his kunai, with the exception of the blue jewel that was now located at the base of the blade, right above the hilt. Thus, in theory, he had an infinite supply of kunai now. He put the original back up his sleeve and started to go down the wall, directing chakra toward his nose and ears to keep them keen. He grabbed a standard kunai from beneath his harness and counted the seconds until he could grasp the symbol he believed would reappear. And his theory was validated 5 seconds later. I completed weapon copy, kunai from other worlds. Would you like the legendary sword to change? Yes, / no, the sword moved a little when you selected yes once more. The blade moved slightly, becoming sharp on both sides, and the prong retracted back. He could change the legendary sword into any other sword or dagger by copying it. It was far more practical than he had first believed. He retrieved a senbon and replaced the kunai, already mounting the castle's outer walls. He sighed after waiting for 15 seconds. The senbon were out, but he never attacked with them. For him, the chopsticks, lockpicks, and backscratchers were simply practical tools to have on hand, much like the standard kunai were helpful for simple tasks like cutting. They were more suited for stabbing than slashing. He noticed some guards standing around idly on top of the wall. It was beneficial for him that even an academy student could just walk in here because they were so overconfident. He leaped down the wall and covered himself with a henge. After landing, he waited for the sign to show for 5 seconds while gripping the handle of Kubikira Bocho. I completed weapon copy, error, because error weapon not recognized was regarded as legendary. It was not possible to add it to transformations. Paying. There is now compensation. Changes will become visible after unlocking. Therefore, he was unable to replicate his Kubikira Bocho or any other weapon that the sword regarded as legendary. Was it because it was one of the 7 swords that belonged to the 7 swordsmen of the mist, or was it because it had the ability to absorb blood? He would need to wait and see if he could find any way to validate his theories. He pulled out his scroll of water before heading into the city. At this point, it was 3/4 full. Before they got to Wave, he hadn't thought it was necessary to replenish because there was always a big water supply close by. However, now he needs to find a river to fill up. He had already spotted 2 structures worth looking into, as well as one from above the wall. There is a large tent close to the outer walls and a large building with some strange geometry that is almost exactly in the middle of the city. For now, however, the river came first. The small smithy in the rear and the larger-than-normal chimney led him to believe that the place he was passing over on his way there was a blacksmith shop. He reached the river in a flash, channeled his chakra into it, and dipped the end of the scroll into the water. A minute later, it was full. However, another issue had arisen while he was traveling. The only structure he had seen with enough noise to be a nighttime bar was too large for one and had a sign he couldn't understand. However, he had heard the distinct noises emanating from it. It sounded more like a pub that catered to mercenaries than an ordinary one. One that was engaged in combat at the moment. Therefore, it appears that he was unable to interpret their language in addition to failing to locate a pub where he might casually obtain information. Their lip movements had been off all along, so he should have anticipated this. He had only just realized that they had been speaking a different language the entire time. He was only relieved that Haku wasn't present since he would never have heard the last of it for such a little error. Yes, the boy had a strong sense of loyalty, but he was still a teenager. He headed toward the strange structure in the heart of the city, where he soon discovered a closed store after noticing the subtle yet noticeable scent of plants. Perfectly, he identified it as a pharmacy via the glass. A crystal ball was placed next to the text above the door of what appeared to be a bookstore across the street, suggesting that it was about magic. He saw the insignia of a sword, a spear, and a bow on one tower and an odd combination of all 3 on another as he continued toward the central building. In his stomach, a pit developed. They weren't being prayed to, were they? Although it didn't resemble any shrine he had ever visited, this one too strongly reminded him of the cult he had destroyed while still employed by the community. When someone got out, he slipped through the top of the enormous door. His suspicions were validated. They were chanting about how the Devil of the Shield had been rescued by the mythical heroes. Why did Kami throw him here with such cruelty? If things didn't work out, he wouldn't have a minute of peace. The king's treatment of the underprivileged child was motivated by his religious convictions. Everything about this was messed up. Sensing a faint pull, he removed his fabled kunai and laid it flat on his hand while suspended upside down from the ceiling. Like a compass, it whirled around before indicating a corridor on the left. He eventually entered a room with a gigantic hourglass that was nearly 4 times his height. A blue light shot from the hourglass in the direction of his kunai as he got closer. A little object emerged at the forefront of his vision when it made contact with the kunai. I wave 2, 475 hours, 45 minutes, and 12 seconds. This was helpful. Thus, it was anticipated that the subsequent wave would emerge in slightly less than 3 weeks. Plenty of time to familiarize yourself with this realm and learn the fundamentals of magic. He had better leave when he heard two more umbu and terrified voices coming from a hidden passage in the corridor he had come from. Reaching one of the windows at the top of the room, opening it, leaving, and closing it without a sound took him no more than 3 seconds. He moved in the direction of the tent, not wanting to be caught. The moon indicated that the sun would rise shortly, so he could have 2 minutes to explore when he arrived before having to depart so he could return to his accommodation at dawn. It was instantly clear what was inside the tent when you peered in at the top. Slaves. Slave cages over slave cages. He probably wouldn't have cared at one point, but now that Haku is dead, he does. After being aware of the boy's intense devotion to him, all it did was make him ill. He never would have imagined anything could handle that, but suddenly something he had done to the child he had thought of as his son did. What action would Haku like him to take? Whatever you want, Zabuza-sama, is presumably what he would say, but what would he actually want him to do? Since he didn't know enough about the reasons why the people were slaves, he was powerless to do anything. Or perhaps the officials were just big fools who failed to see the slave broker within the tent. Whatever it was, he would need to return to his room and consider what Haku would want him to do. Perhaps his new objective is to become someone Haku can proudly call a father, not out of blind devotion, but because he truly believed that to be the case. He laughed to himself. That one speech from the blond boy in the hideous orange jumpsuit had completely transformed him. The youngster was already a greater person than he ever could have been or would be. How was he doing, he wondered. He had little trouble returning to his room undetected, and he even slept for 3 hours before being informed that breakfast would be served. He was led to the dining area, where the other 3 were already eating, legendary sword around his waist. He picked up a few items and devoured them before the others saw. He wouldn't simply give away such an advantage, and they hadn't yet seen his face. Hey, Momochi-san. He noticed the shield youngster off to the side. Why do you people keep calling me and each other by our family names? Oh. Sorry, in our country, Japan, we introduce ourselves with our family names first, so we thought Momochi was your given name. It isn't. Okay. So we figured some more things out yesterday. Apparently, the 3 of us come from different versions of the same country, but you probably came from a whole other place, considering the things you told us and that your clothes would only be found in made-up stories. Even though Itsuki's world is kind of weird. They also said some things about how this world works as the game. That was fascinating information. Like what? Well, they mostly told me how I'm screwed because I have a shield and it's the worst weapon in the game. He simply sneered at that. Actually, those 2 weren't very good fighters. Given that one of them is brandishing a bow, attacking isn't always the best course of action. Do you think I'm useless too? For attacking? Probably. But if it existed in those games of yours, they must have had a way to level up, so just do that. Honestly, it depends all on your skill and what you try. People can kill with their bare hands. What's so difficult about doing the same thing with a piece of metal that has sharp edges? But my attack stat is too low. I can't do damage when someone has defense. I don't understand shit about what you just said, but if you ram that thing into someone's throat, they won't get back up again for some time. The door opened and they were led to the king before the child could say anything more about those strange games. His first action upon entering the throne room was to examine the adventurers, as the monarch had referred to them yesterday, who had assembled. And once more, this world left him completely unimpressed. He would wager his last remaining funds that none of them had ever engaged in actual combat, much less taken a life. He would never abandon someone he didn't pick himself, even if he did. Welcome, heroes. About 2, he had assembled a group of experienced adventurers to assist them, and he could already hear the speech approaching. How they would become stronger as a team and conquer every challenge. A speech that would fit in perfectly with this small world he had entered, reminiscent of a fairy tale. Something he refused to handle. I won't let any of those runts come with me. If someone guards my back, then because I asked them to. So I'll be off doing something productive. Are you certain, Sir Sword Hero? I can assure you these are all accomplished warriors. No, they're not. They're a bunch of inexperienced shits who are still wet behind their ears, wanting to make a name for themselves by fighting with one of the heroes. I work alone, or with those that I choose. Very well, it seems I won't be able to change your mind, so at least let me give you the funds necessary to start your journey. He was handed a hefty bag at the king's signal, and when he looked inside, he saw that it was filled with silver coins. I hereby bequeath 600 silver coins to Momochi. Use it to equip yourself and then begin your journey. Great, he had money now. He should first get blood clotting and blood replenishing medications from the apothecary. He would next go to the bookstore across the street to see if he could find out anything about magic and possibly the language of this realm. He became aware that the Umbu was pursuing him as he entered the castle gates. Compared to the ones in the cult building or the castle, this one was far superior. Either this was a third party looking for information, or the king had sent an elite after him. When he was out of town, he would take care of them. He should ignore them and continue with his plan for the time being. He wasn't roof hopping this time, so it took him a little longer to get to the apothecary. But after a while he smelled it again. After entering, he proceeded directly to the counter and rang the bell above it. An elderly man approached from behind the curtain that blocked the passage farther inside. He gave him a dubious look and raised an eyebrow when he saw the sword at his waist. And what can I do for the sword hero? I need blood clotting and blood replenishing medicine. You don't want healing potions? How effective are they and how much do they cost? In terms of effectiveness, they just magically speed up your healing process. They are preferred by adventurers due to their speed. But those hard-headed morons forget that it drains their stamina and keep chucking the things like alcohol, often dying of exhaustion. They can't get it through their thick skulls that vitality isn't everything they need. For price, 50 silver for a small one, 150 for a medium, and 5 gold for a large. Good, 2 small ones and blood replenishment and clotting for 50 silver split in even amounts. After a little searching, the man set 2 fist-sized sacks and 2 tiny flasks filled with red liquid on the counter. He quickly looked into each bag and found some pills, some red, some green. The green ones are clotting, the red ones replenishing. If you bring me back the flasks of the potions once you use them, I'll give you 5 silver each. You have more common sense than all other adventures that have come by this week combined. These things are expensive to make. With hero discount, that will be 135 silver. Hero discount? The king ordered that all heroes be given a 10% discount. Ignore that. I'll pay the whole price and not owe that man anything else. I like you. You know what you want and have more common sense than a rock, which I can say about almost no other adventurer. Come back any time. After giving the man a nod, he gave him the money and put the medication and potions in his pouches. He saw the Umbu waiting on the roof next to the pharmacist when he was leaving. He went on into the bookstore on the other side of the street. He nearly stumbled when he saw the woman behind the counter as he entered. Without the warts and crooked nose, she resembled a witch from a children's book. Now, what can I do for the esteemed sword hero? I need information about magic and something to learn how to read your language. After blinking a couple of times, the woman gave him another glance. I can give you a dictionary and a book used to teach the basics to children. For the magic, I would need to appraise your affinities first. Does that cost and how long does that take? It takes not even a minute, and I usually do it for free when you purchase something along with it. Great, what do I need to do? Nothing much, just sit here while I appraise them. Watching the woman pull a crystal ball out from beneath the counter, he took a seat in the designated chair. A crystal ball, for crying out loud. He heard a familiar snigger, and his head whipped to his left. His look gave him the impression that he had just heard Haku snicker. Even though the bottom part of his face was bandaged, the youngster had always been able to read it. No, he must be having hallucinations. He couldn't possibly be here. Haku was a kind and naive youngster who had been sent here to have a chance at redemption. He wouldn't accompany him here. How peculiar. Looking back, he forced his face to return to its previous expressionless exterior. Your water affinity seems to be uncannily strong. Even for the rumors about the unusual strength of a hero's affinity. You wouldn't happen to know about it? What is that information worth to you? I'll give you the language books for free. Together they would be about 50 silver. Same price as a beginner grimoires. Grimoire? When you study it, you'll be able to learn about the magic and learn to use it. It's much more effective than crystal balls that immediately teach you the spell, since you actually understand how it works. Those seemed helpful. Although he was unaware of this water magic's potential, he could get around one of his greatest Sueton weaknesses if he could utilize it to make water out of nothing. If that worked, it would significantly increase his fighting skills. He might be able to perform the minor Sueton jutsu without a water source, but he couldn't perform the larger ones. Put in a water magic grimoire and I'll tell you what I think may be the reason. She gave him a quick glance. Deal. It's probably my chakra. Something similar to your magic from my world. That's all you're going to tell me, isn't it? Fine. I can't blame you for not revealing your secrets to me 5 minutes after we met. She looked around the store a little and found his 3 books and one more. Here are your books. This here is a beginner support grimoire. It'll cost you 50 silver if you want it as well. I'll take it. Great, so with the discount dash, he held up a hand to halt her. How about another deal? We forget that stupid discount, and in exchange, you'll keep an ear out for interesting information for me? Void the discount and just keep doing what I'm doing? You certainly got yourself a deal. He placed the money on the table and took the books. His supply scroll was nearly full based on his inventory from yesterday. It would likely hold the 4 volumes and not much more. However, he didn't want the Umbu who were still pursuing him to know about his sealing scrolls. To pinpoint the exact location of the Umbu, he paused and focused chakra into his ears and nose. Behind the 3rd chimney are 2 residences further down the road. 2 minutes more would put him in the thick of the crowd on the tiny market square. After hiding the books in a side lane, re-enter the crowd and socialize. For no more than a minute, it would give the impression that the Umbu had simply lost sight of him. It just so happened that the blacksmith he had located was also in that area. He filtered out what he saw when he opened his eyes again so that he could concentrate on his ears and keep an eye on the spy. Particularly their heartbeat, to observe their reaction to him disappearing from view. Getting away from the crowd without anyone noticing wasn't difficult. As he gazed about, the Ambu could hear the ruffle of his clothing and his pulse rate just slightly raised. He was on a building on one side of the lane he had selected, which was helpful. He was walking back through the crowd less than 30 seconds later when he noticed a familiar, new scent. As he followed it, he noticed a little fruit stand. 1 apple. 2 copper. He accepted the red apple and handed over the 2 cents. Vitamins were essential. He headed for the store, munching the apple through the openings in his bandages that allowed him to eat and drink in secret. According to his heartbeat slowing down once more, the Ambu had discovered him while he was purchasing the apple. He arrived quickly, and as he opened the door, a redhead girl nearly bumped into him as she was leaving. "Mine, are you okay?" He turned to see the child behind her, now wearing armor. Although he didn't know anything about armor, he was completely unaware of it. He approached to the counter and nodded to the child. "You do commissions?" "Sure, what you need?" He gave the man one of his kunai after flicking it out of his sleeve. "Can you make more of these, and how much would one cost?" He may now have an endless supply of kunai thanks to the legendary kunai, but it was only one. He would need to quickly find a reliable supply of regular ones. It's easy enough to make. Single ones will be more expensive because I'd have to fire up the forge for just them. I'd say 25 silver for single ones. If you want 5 or more, it's 5 per piece. Can you always have 20 ready to give me? I'll pay up front for them as long as you always have at least 20. Sure, in that case, it's flat 5 silver per piece. If you pay now, I'll have the first 20 ready tomorrow. He gave the 100 silver to him. Although he had now built a strong foundation, he had already lost half of his money. He might need to spend a few nights away from the city and work on restocking them. I just need to make a few measurements of this and you can have it back. Feel free to try out any swords or look at the armors. Should he simply imitate the man's swords? He wouldn't genuinely steal from the man, and it wasn't like he hadn't stolen before. However, he needed those kunai, and it would likely deteriorate his relationship with the smith. I don't think you'd like that. Why, the other heroes did it too, except for the shield kid. Therefore, the blondie and Baoboy had no qualms about stealing the man's creations in this manner. Unfortunately for them, he will expose their actions. He might gain extra points with the smith as a result. I can copy those blades when I hold them. It's probably what the other two did. Don't know if the kid just didn't know he could or was too decent of a person. Those bastards. Just throw them out next time they come. Can't. The king demands that we serve all heroes no matter what, along with that ridiculous discount. I say fuck that discount. Yeah, you help save our world, but I still need to make a living. I don't need that discount. Don't want to owe that man any favors. And not like I have any interest in any of your swords. Yeah, with that thing on your back I'd imagine so. Can you even fight with something that ridiculously heavy and big? Course I can. I would be a pretty big idiot lugging a weapon around that I have no idea of how to use. Makes sense. You're not the spear guy after all. He gave the man a curious glance. He twirled his spear around like it was a toy, and when he tested out mine, his grip was atrocious with a stance that a toddler could break. What an idiot. You know any way I can make some money? Well, you could always just sell monster parts to the various vendors in the city. If you get sturdy stuff, like bones or hide, I'll take it for a better price. He had a source of money now. Everything was prepared, and he could go out and identify the precise beasts he was meant to eliminate. He ought to obtain a satchel or bag of some kind as well. That must have been in the smith's possession. He checked his status, which now read 4%, meaning that in order to reach level 2, he would need to kill an additional 96 of those. Their hide might have been handy. He approached them, retrieved his kunai, and then picked up one of the orange balloon's remnants. It was rubber. He was using his teeth to murder intelligent orange balloons. Rubber might be helpful, though. After putting the bits in his pocket, he pulled out his sword and, with a quick thought, turned it into a pronged kunai. He could just as easily use this instead of risking his kunai chipping when it struck a rock in the dirt. For the past 3 hours, all he had seen were balloons, with the only difference being their colors. The red ones, which appeared to be the rarest, awarded him 2 experience points rather than 1. When he discovered a river, he was about level 5 and his bag was already half full. Given that the Umbu were still pursuing him, it would appear that it was time to deal with them. As he approached the river, he grabbed Kubakiribocho and smashed it into the ground near the river's edge. Then, he crouched down and drank some water from a hole in his bandages. He used his free hand to activate the Kirigakure no Jutsu while feigning innocence. Once more, he was happy that he had trained to use them because they were so much more useful. He had only taught Haku how to perform them one-handedly because of this. He had a familiar disorientation as the first slivers of mist rose from the lake. He instinctively stopped the chakra's flow, and the little mist disappeared. What on earth was going on? Chakra weariness had started with that sensation. But nothing significant that would deplete his reserves to that degree had been attempted. He had only attempted to employ the Kirigakure no Jutsu. He inhaled deeply and focused on his reserves to determine how much remained. He had only about a third of his reserves left, and his eyes widened in disbelief when he saw they were hardly the size of the typical civilian teenager when full. This wasn't good. He had to use his reserves sparingly, even though they were sufficient for wall walking and augmentation. Furthermore, for the time being, water walking and other jutsu were totally out of the question. Luckily, he still had control, so his primary concern would be to re-establish his reserves through physical activity. However, he would also need to discover the reason of their significant reduction in size. Since he began using his chakra for training, his reserves had never been this low. He had to find a different strategy to face the Umbu at the moment. About 10 meters behind and on his left, they were concealed in an area of tall grass. Smoke bombs were out, not only because he didn't have any on him, but also because the cloud they produced wouldn't have been far enough. He would need to check when he was somewhere private, but perhaps he had some in his supply scroll. A shunshin was likewise out of the question with his pitiful reserves. His best option was to approach them covertly in the hopes of getting to him before he fled. He wouldn't dare try to utilize chakra to increase his speed because his reserves were already depleted. It didn't use up any because it merely moved the chakra around in his body rather than releasing it, but it might still consume more than he had right now. With a plan in place, he got up and carried Kubakiribocho. After a few moments of surveying the area, he shrugged his shoulders and headed into the dense grass, which was roughly 5 meters to the right of the Umbu. This was perhaps even better than his initial idea because, in contrast to his mist, the tall grass was organic and wouldn't raise suspicions in the eyes of anyone who might see it. He squatted down and went quiet as he entered the grass. The Umbu was still standing. He ran silently behind the Umbu and now got a clear view of them. In addition to the entirely black cloak they were wearing, he could make out the edge of a blank porcelain mask. He threw him to the ground and positioned the Kubakiribocho grove above his neck, digging it slightly into the ground so the Umbu couldn't escape. Now I have some questions for you. No one could see them unless they were able to have a bird's perspective because the Umbu was pressed firmly into the earth and he was practically lying on top of him. I assume you know what happens when you don't answer. He waited for a response for a few seconds. First, who are you? I am a shadow of Her Majesty? Her? So the Queen? Yes. Where is she? On a political summit. Since she went to the summit and not the king, I assume she holds more power? Yes. And now the other countries are pissed because Melromark summoned all four of us and she's trying to prevent a war. Yes. The surprise in the man's voice was audible to him. Why so surprised? I'm not an idiot like Blondie and Balboy. Next question, what's the Queen's position towards the shield hero and the religious prejudice against him? She thinks it's idiotic and is afraid that a war will be inevitable because someone will try to ruin his reputation. So that's why one of your colleagues was following him so that she will know the truth when something like that happens. Okay, why are you following me? I know you aren't following the other two. When I saw them popping balloons, there was no one following them. He waited nearly a full minute for a response. Listen. If you want to survive this and not ruin any chances of the Queen with me, like her husband already did, you better tell me, and it better be the truth. The shadow waited another 30 seconds, then sighed and responded. I was told to follow any of the other heroes should they seem too dangerous and suspicious, analyze their abilities, and find out their position regarding both the church and the king. And your thoughts on the analyzation? You are a dangerous man. Unless you want us to know them or are desperate, we won't find out any of your techniques. You are a trained assassin or warrior since you had no problem detecting me and other shadows. Judging from your unnoticeable approach and the strategic use of the tall grass, I'd say the former. You have definitely killed before and will use any advantage you can gain against anyone you see as your enemy. Spot on. Now you can deliver a message to the Queen for me. As long as the king or any other royalty doesn't do anything monumental stupid against me, say frame me for a crime, I won't be opposed to working with her. For the right price, of course. Any other shadow she'll send after me to spy will lose their head. If she has a job for me, tell her that whoever is to approach me should mention that the Mizukich has fallen and make sure that no one else is present to hear. I'll at least listen to the request. Understood? Yes. Good. You're free to go. After removing Kubakiribosho from the man's neck, he disappeared once again into the grass and waited for the man to move away before returning to the river. It would be soothing to go swimming. Additionally, he was able to hold his breath for a considerable amount of time without using chakra to improve his lungs. After all, he was from Kiri. He was enjoying the water as he followed the river downstream when his ankle got caught in something. He used Kubakirabocho to whip around and cut whatever was holding him, only to discover a dozen or so more snake-like worms attempting to pull him down from the riverbed. Additionally, the one he just killed had awarded him 5 experience points, if that hadn't been enough incentive to kill them. After a brief massacre, he was halfway to level 6 and had 7 of those items in his backpack. He concentrated on his chakra reserves and was happy to see that they had both increased slightly and been entirely restored after the short period. He utilized his chakra control to make the water slide off his clothes as he stepped out of the river and onto the bank, using up almost half of his reserves in the process. He lacked the serves necessary to assemble it into a ball, as is customary. Given the sun, he should most likely head back in time to locate a vendor and sell the leftover balloon and worms. The snakeworm's hide might be useful to Earhart. He didn't bother to pick up the scraps as he threw his fabled kunai at every balloon within range on his way back. When he got to the city, he had just attained level 6, and his kunai was hung at his waist, transformed back into a sword. He arrived at Earhart's store in a flash. Earhart was putting some fresh swords on a rack when he entered. "Hey, I want to know if you can use some things." "Yeah, what VE you got?" He removed a piece of rubber. "Shitload of this. Those are useless for armor." "Ha! It's similar to a material from my world that was highly insulating, thought it may give some electrical resistance when you put it under armor. Could be worth a try. What else you got?" Before he could say anything, Earhart had already pulled the body from one of the worms. "Where did you get a tangworm, and how did you manage to cut it so cleanly?" "These things live underwater, most people just bombard them with spells from the surface. The hide is one of the best things around here for hilts or whips. I'll take any others if you find more." "I got 5 more." "The whole bodies? Not just cut off at some point?" "All I could get out of the holes. All future knives are for free and you can copy anything for free." "Just for the 5 bodies? Hell, I give you that for 3 of them. Do you know for how much I can sell a whip made out of a whole tangworm?" "Well, I'll need money, so you can have the scraps and 3 bodies for that deal." "How much can you give me for the rest?" "I could give you 3 gold per body, it's a reasonable price." "How much silver is a gold?" 100, same with copper to silver." "Take them." "Great. I'll get your money. What are you planning to use the scraps with?" "I got an old green cape I can try it with tonight." He counted the coins in the bag to make sure it was the correct amount. "You know an inn I can eat and sleep for tonight? Try Rosmerta's down the street, it's frequented by adventurers and I doubt you would encounter one of the blonde bastards there." "Thanks." He located the restaurant quickly, had an inexpensive meal, and then went to his room to spend a few hours learning the local language before going to bed. Underscore 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 underscore. Someone knocked on his door, waking him. As he jumped out of bed and grabbed Kubikirabocho, he instinctively slid 3 kunais into each palm and flung them at the door. Eep. What? An attacker would not respond to that in that way. He proceeded to open the door after hefting Kubikirabocho over his shoulder. 3 troops were on the ground, trembling in terror. He noticed an explorer on their right who was trying not to giggle. "Well, why the hell did you wake me up by pounding on my door like you were trying to break in and kill me? TT the K-King has summoned you." "Great. What are you still doing here?" "I know the way to the castle." The 3 ran down the hallway as quickly as they could. He looked at the door and noticed that it was pierced by his kunai. Ah, shit. He glanced across at the explorer. "You know how much this costs to replace?" "Doors are 20 silver. You're not the first to break one, or a bed, stool, chest, window, or table." "Thanks." Before heading downstairs and placing the key and 20 silver pieces on the counter, he yanked his kunai out of the door and reinserted them into his sleeves. The proprietor and bartender, Rosmerta, simply gave him a nod before calling for the carpenter to come in. Now, what did the king desire? Was it illegal to turn down the reductions now? To be honest, that was the only thing that sprang to mind that might entice the king to speak with him. He took a leisurely stroll to the castle. When he arrived, he was quickly led into the throne room, where he was shown a scene he had preferred to avoid. The Shield Kid was kneeling in rags in front of the throne, and Bao Boy was staring at him as if he were something repulsive, while the redhead who had been accompanying him was now cowering behind Blondie, who was dressed in the Shield Kid's armor. The only question now was which crime the kid was falsely accused of. "Ah, Sword Hero, you have arrived. The trial can begin. Will someone finally tell me why I am here? You know exactly what you did to my daughter, you devil." Fantastic. Thus, this was a charade that only served to destroy the kid's spirit and reputation. Regardless, they had judged him guilty. As he walked beside the two idiots, he glanced thoughtfully at the queen's shadow that he could see in the rafters. "Zabuza, do you know what's going on?" "No clue." "Don't play innocent now, Fumi. You tried to rape poor mine. She came to me crying with ripped clothes. You're lucky she wanted to wait until the morning to confront you." He arranged his day because it would not matter if he kept listening. Perhaps today he would venture into that woodland. There, he would most likely find monsters with more experience. A couple hours of the language again in the evening. He only needed the grammar and vocabulary now that he had mastered the alphabet. As soon as his eyes met the kid's, he turned to face him. He saw the pain in those eyes, pain that was gradually becoming anger. However, he didn't care about it. Haku's visage appeared in place of the kid's when he wished to briefly break eye contact. Oh no! Haku wasn't here. He had previously framed more than enough individuals his own age, so it was just a random child being set up for a crime. Why should he give a damn? It was just a kid who had been brought into this world and was being set up for something he had no control over. Everything else was drowned out as scenes from the bloodline purges flashed before his eyes. After calming his breathing and closing his eyes, he opened them once more. Ultimately, Naofumi was furious and swore at them before heading off. "Now great heroes dash, I'm off. Here's the money you gave me. I don't owe you anything." In front of the king, he tossed a small bag containing 6 gold coins. "Momochi, where are you going?" "I got shit to kill." He simply left, ignoring their objections. All he would do was reimburse the child for the questions he had answered on the day they were called. He hurried out of the city and waited, sometimes popping balloons with his fabled kunai while leaning on a tree. An hour or so later, he witnessed the kid leave the city, now clad in a green cloak. He observed him unsuccessfully punching some balloons. "You're not getting anywhere hitting them with something blunt." The child spun around and hurled a balloon at him, which he caught with ease after it had been chewing on his arm. "What do you want?" "I'm repaying you. You answered 4 questions for me, so you get 4 favors. Now or in the future, your choice." "You think I'm innocent? You don't have the guts to rape her. Add to that the fact she was not acting like a rape victim at all and that Blondie was wearing your armor?" "No." "Then why didn't you say anything?" "It wouldn't have changed anything." The child reached for his shirt collar. "You still could have said something." He pulled the child from the ground and placed him in front of him. "Listen, you're lucky I decided to help at all. I'm a cold-blooded killer. There is no rational reason for me to help you, so you either accept or I leave and you'll die when the time comes." There was no reason for me to say anything and ruin my reputation as well. He scowled at the child as he dropped him to the ground. "Like I said, 4 favors. TCH, whatever, just leave." This was just a huge muddle. Perhaps he should seek another 100 or 200 balloons before Earhart gave him any language tips. His knapsack was filled after 3 hours of vigorous balloon popping, and he left for the metropolis. Blondie tried to strike up a conversation at the gates, but he ignored her. He hurried over to Earhart's store, put the sack on the counter, and entered. "Did you have time to test the cloak before you gave it to the kid? Do you think he is guilty?" "I neither have a dick for a brain, nor less than half a brain cell, and am also not the girl's father." "So, did you test it?" "No, I didn't have an opportunity, and he needed something at least." The kunais attached to his arms were visible when he removed his wrist warmers. "Try it with these. See if it works." After taking the warmers, the smith examined them. "You know, I could make you some of these that actually can take a blow but are still as flexible when you get me the right materials. Can you keep it light? When you get me the right stuff. With the hide of a shark bear, I could make you leg and arm warmers. Their hide is highly stab and slash resistant, and the gray wouldn't look much different from these ones." "Okay. What's a shark bear?" "Imagine a bear with a shark head, tail and backfin, about as big as a bear too. They have coarse hide that has scales all over it. You pull your hand over them while it has them standing, and your skin with a good chunk of flesh is gone." "What do you mean has them standing?" "Normally the scales lay flat against its hide. When it feels threatened, it somehow stands them up. You find it sometimes along the river in the forest. But it's more common in forests along the ocean. If you find one before the next wave, I can make you some. Bring me the body and I can process it. Just get it here before it starts rotting. I'll look for it. Think about what you need for a complete set." "Sure. See you around. In a few days maybe. I'm going shark hunting." "You have bigger backpacks?" "In the corner, just take one as long as you bring it back." Because Kisame was so knowledgeable about sharks, he was able to entice that creature out. Only sharks and bears had sensitive nostrils, so when he bled out an animal into the river, they were bound to arrive. He would also receive new arm and leg warmers. In addition to getting a tough fight, he could rip the thing's smug smile to pieces by posing as Kisame. He finally saw anything other than balloons, thus it was a smart decision to enter the jungle. There had been strange round rabbits, strange live mushrooms, and strange egg balloon-like objects on the forest's edges. He had also discovered a porcupine with needles that were very strong. He had skinned the one porcupine and the few rabbits he had discovered. In order to begin rebuilding his chakra reserves, he had also twice carefully depleted them. They had grown somewhat, but they were still pitifully small. In another 2 days or so, he might be able to begin employing water walking and small jutsu. He had also gone through his supply scroll once he had arrived at the wilderness. Even though it hurt, he gave up all the Ryo he and Haku had acquired because they were useless in this place. He had previously attempted to convert or sell them, but they were just written off as worthless foreign cash. He hadn't even been able to promote them as his world's money because, presumably, everyone else had a corresponding one, so nobody had taken him seriously. In addition, he had locked up 3 additional pairs of Haku's clothes, 2 of which he had burned. He wanted a reminder of his son, even though he wouldn't need the last one. He had also disposed of the majority of his sunbond needles because he was no longer able to utilize them. Throwing one at the porcupine had hurt. It seems that the only weapon he was permitted to use was a sword. However, he had saved around 20 of them since they were useful for purposes other than fighting. In addition, he had taken his 3 smoke bombs and 5 more explosive tags. After all of that, he was able to free up around half of the scroll. His change of clothes, kunai, explosive tags, camping gear, rations, and a few other items occupy the remaining space. He had soon followed the sound of rushing water into the bush and discovered a river. He was already well into the forest after following it. When he finally found what he was seeking for, he was 1/3 of the way to level 10. There was an underwater tunnel on one bank of the river, which had widened into a medium-sized lake. He listened while holding his breath and heard a large object moving within. He was probably searching for one of those shark bear items. He had no idea what this beast was capable of, whereas all the other monsters he had faced up to this point had been merely ridiculous and posed no more of a threat than a common cold. Since he had time, he had to get ready. He took 3 explosive tags and placed them between 2 trees at the lake's edge. 2 are on the trees, and 1 is on the ground. He then positioned himself on a tree branch behind the gap of the 2 trapped trees, took a handful of usable meat as the text above them apparently called those strange rabbits, throws the meat into the water, and then throws another handful a little behind the explosive tag on the ground. He heard movement just after the meat broke the water's surface, so he picked up Kubikirabocho and prepared. A creature with strange short gray fur and scales on it surfaced on the beach a minute later. Given how accurate his description had been, he had to deliver it to the smith. With the exception of size, which was more akin to 2 or 3 bears. He glanced over it a little and identified the likely cause. I've level 22, shark bear mother it was more than twice as high as him. In other words, he would have a challenge at last. As he waited for the creature to situate itself, he made a one-handed ram seal. The search for the meat was not long. He boosted his chakra and set off the tags as soon as its lips opened to swallow the chunks. He was racing in with the intention of removing one of its legs before the dust had even begun to settle from the 3 explosions that occurred at once. He was about to turn around and cut down through its eye when he heard a metallic ping and his sword bounced off the leg without even scratching it. He had already swung his blade to where he knew its right leg would be. Just before the beast's maw would have sucked him up, he righted himself and leaped away. This wasn't good. He landed on a tree branch and bided his time till the dust settled. Additionally, he saw a strange bar on the top of his vision that was filled with something red to around 3/4. Something was wrong since the beast appeared to be burned and one of its legs appeared to be fractured. He leaped to another tree, palmed 3 kunai, and threw them at one of its eyeballs in midair. However, the creature moved its head in his direction before they could strike, and 2 of the kunai struck its face with the same metallic sound before hitting the ground. But the third one performed what it was supposed to do, sinking into the corners of its eye and reducing the amount of red material in the bar. Perhaps it was a representation of the monster's HP. He peered at the beast that was now after him as he leaped a few trees away to gain some distance. Therefore, he was unable to pierce its hide. Perhaps he could do it by channeling chakra into his sword, but he lacked the necessary energy to do so effectively and still be able to battle afterwards. Although he had 7 more explosive tags on him at the moment and another 45 in his scroll for emergencies, he should use them carefully because he had no supply of fresh ones. The creature had discovered him once more, so he leaped a couple more trees. He had returned to the lake's edge. He required weak spots because he couldn't pierce the hide. The eyes were already working. Even he could get something in its mouth, or even the nose as well. He didn't know if its innards was as strong as its exterior, but his best 2 options would be to get an explosive tag on the roof of its mouth. The other, and presumably more trustworthy, method would be to force Kubikirabocho into its brain through its eye socket. But even that wasn't certain to kill it. After all, he had encountered brainless beasts here, so there was no assurance. He hoped that the kunai trapped in it would partially blind it as he leaped around the trees to face its left flank. He landed silently, wrapped a kunai in an explosive tag, and bided his time till the moment was right. I completed weapon copy, kunai with an otherworld pronged, explosive. Would you like the legendary sword to change? Yes, / no, this was good, I see. Before transforming his legendary sword, he unwrapped the tag once more and placed it back in his pocket. Since he had no idea when the kunai would return to him, he seized the chance and threw it, hitting the eye dead center and instantly spiking his chakra to detonate it. In his vision, the bar dramatically lowered once again, reaching roughly half. Now, the beast was running wild and destroying trees without actually looking for him. He quietly landed on the ground and threw the kunai once more, this time directing it to pass in front of its right side. He then detonated it in front of the eye, resulting in yet another enormous drop in the bar. With Kubakiribocho positioned in front of him for a thrust, he was already racing forward as he detonated the kunai and pushed it into the left eye socket and up to the handle into its head until he encountered resistance. The beast had fallen to the ground, quivering as he withdrew his sword from its brain, and the bar was now totally deserted. You attained level 10. You attained level 11. You attained level 12. You attained level 13. You attained level 14. You attained level 15. You attained level 16. The battle had been worthwhile. He had obtained the reason he had come here, nearly increased his level, and possessed an endless supply of explosive kunai. But he was interested. Was there anything of interest in this creature's lair? He could quickly achieve his nearly full chakra without using any. There would undoubtedly be something fascinating there. He then entered the water, dove under, and headed toward the cave after having that thought. He arrived at it in a short time. As he entered, he noticed a heap of bones on one side of the cave and what appeared to be a shark egg on the wall across from it. He walked closer to the mound of bones, ignoring the egg sac. He had anticipated some partially eaten bones, but they were picked clean and in excellent condition. He was unsure about how a sharkmaw creature could have done this. He ultimately chose a circular jaw with pointed teeth on the inside and some larger, more robust bones that were difficult for him to bend. He nearly missed the soft tearing sound behind him as he peered through the bones. After spinning around, he drew Kubakiribocho and confronted a shark bear that was no larger than one of those Usapil rabbits. Even though it didn't affect him, this freshly hatched monster somehow managed to look like a cute puppy. However, because it wasn't attacking him, he decided to ignore it and headed back to the coast. He examined the beast's carcass after putting the bones in the rucksack he had received from the smith. He could attempt to deconstruct it himself, but he wasn't the best at that kind of thing and couldn't consistently cut its skin. How, then, would he retrieve this? He would likely reach the city tomorrow about midday, but it would take him at least one more day. The trees were too small to allow it to get through there efficiently, but he could definitely carry the carcass, however it would slow him down significantly. When something nudges his ankle, he instinctively jumps onto a branch since he was so preoccupied with trying to get the thing back that he hadn't spotted it coming. He noticed the shark bear baby staring around in confusion and making strange growling sounds as he looked down. He leaped back from the tree, holding Kubakiribocho in his hand, and went to the infant and its mother. When he got close enough, the creature turned back to face him and staggered toward him on minuscule legs. How, indeed, had he missed it coming at him? When it got to him, it brushed against his ankle once again, displaying no signs of animosity. Since he had been the first thing it had seen, had it somehow imprinted itself on him? He knelt down and tentatively extended his hand, only to have it approach and nuzzle into it. This animal resembled a strange puppy in every way. So you want to come with me? Before snarling once more, the creature gave him a gaze that he could only describe as understanding. Ike level 1 shark bear has joined your group. If you're coming with me, you'll need a name. The only shark I ever knew was that bastard Kisame. The grin the monster was wearing gave him a horrible feeling. No, that's not your name. Ike level 1 of shark bear, Kisame, shark bear, level 1 He wanted something to divert his attention because he couldn't think about it. The dead body. He could pull the item with a little rope till he was out of the woods because the river was deep enough. That being said, those tangworm things might try to pull it down. He ignored that notion as he looked down at the infant. If it had to, it could tear through those things. He pulled out his supply scroll, unwrapped a considerable amount of rope, and approached the cadaver. How was he going to get it past the obstacle now? Perhaps because the infant had showed that he understood? With a piercing whistle, it turned to face him, and he jerked his head to call for it to approach. Over the carcass, he tossed the rope. Here, take that rope, and when I lift this thing, you walk underneath it and bring it back to me. Got it? He grabbed the carcass and raised it after waiting until it had swayed to the opposite side. Damn, that thing weighed a lot. When he would be carrying over the plains, he would undoubtedly need to use chakra to strengthen his muscles. Luckily, it didn't take his buddy long to retrieve the rope. After he was safe, he began tying a knot to fasten the rope around the carcass. Underscore 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 underscore. The only difficulty they had faced on the trip back was dealing with tangworms, which Kisame quickly dispatched. The fact that his first partner in this stupid universe had given itself that name still infuriated him. The day following his successful hunt, his partner had already attained level 4 as the city came into view. He set down the carcass for a while and blew the shrill whistle that had soon become the call for Kisame to approach him. He took his buddy and placed him in the little bag he had originally purchased from the smiths. He was unsure about the public's reaction if he simply ran around unhindered. He shouldered the carcass once more and continued on his journey towards the city after he was inside the satchel and had fastened it to his harness once more. Happy that it wasn't too far from the gate, he headed towards the smiths, ignoring the gaping guards and bystanders on the street. When he got there, he saw an issue. He had originally intended to drop the cadaver in the smith's backyard before making his way to the front. However, he couldn't fit the object down the alleyway since it was too small. Now, it wouldn't have been an issue if he had a cart or something to place it on, but he was growing weary of carrying it on his shoulders. Having abandoned his initial strategy, he proceeded to the front door and kicked it open. He remained bent over, allowing the body to be raised off the ground, and as he peered inside, he saw the smith and the kid with a small girl dressed in some sort of fighting gear. Were those raccoon ears and a tail? He glanced at the smith, tearing his gaze from the girl. The thing was bigger than a normal bear. What? I'd say about 3 times the average one. So you better get me some good shit with this. He entered the shop after letting the carcass fall to the floor with a loud thump. He headed to the counter, passing the female who was now hiding behind one of his legs and the child. Along with that thing, I got these bones and a few other things. Placing the bones he had taken from the cave, the usapil pelts, and the items he had taken from that porcupine on the table. He noticed that the kid and the smith were both staring at the cadaver when he looked up. What the hell? That's a goddamn shark bear mother with that size. Where the fuck did you find one, and more importantly, how did you kill it with your level? He turned and stared blankly at the man. Explosives. He heard a familiar and unwanted voice outside before the talk could continue, speaking in a tone he most definitely did not like. He moved as quickly as he could without using chakra, snatched the bowboy's wrist before he could touch it, and gave the boy a gaze that bordered on murder. The fuck you think you're doing? And now Momochi. You can't just keep something as valuable as this to yourself. Surely you wouldn't mind me taking a bit, right? He leaned in and spoke in a voice that only the youngster could hear, refusing to let go of the wrist. You touch my kill and I'll shove my sword into your eye socket and through your brain like I did with that thing. Understood? He made sure the boy realized that he was serious by tightening his hold. After letting go, the boy staggered back and quickly left with his companions. He turned to see the smith looking at the body. Yep. Definitely a shark bear mother. I'll get a cart from the back. Then you can help me to get it there and I'll start working on it. Will probably take me about 3 days total. When the kid came out of the store and smirked at him, the crowd had already thinned away. One of my favors, let me feed some of that to my shield. The hell you mean feed it to your shield? A puzzled expression appeared on the kid's face. You haven't done it? No, why would I? It's how you can unlock new shields or in your case swords. He blinked. Twice. Ha! You haven't tried it? No, I haven't tried to tell my sword to open wide and chew before swallowing. You put the stuff to the crystal. Fascinating. He would undoubtedly need to give that a try later. Just tell the smith that you can have some scales from it. Good. But if you didn't know that absorb function, how did you unlock new weapons? Really, the kid hadn't yet attempted to obtain another shield? The girl's shriek, directed at his waist, cut through his thoughts. He hadn't bothered to clean himself after going hunting in the plains, so as he looked down, he saw Kisame sticking his head out with blood smeared across his face.